The original poster's saga has gotten so long, so I will make a summary of the previous before getting into the last update. Original poster is in his 30s, and his younger brother, Dan, is 29. Dan is married with 4 kids. Sister-in-law refuses to work, so Dan can't afford to live anywhere but with his parents, in a crowded 3-bedroom home. Dan is the golden child of the family. At the pandemic's start, original poster lost his job and couldn't afford his place. Knowing he was about to be homeless, he bought a camper and asked his parents if he could park it on their property. They wanted a high rent. After a few months, original poster finally gets a job at a warehouse that even lets him park his camper there. He works his tail off and moves up in the company, saving his money. Eventually, he buys a house. His family shows up unannounced, and sister-in-law and Dan look at the house with greedy eyes. Dan wants to move his whole family in, rent-free. Original poster tells him no, and sister-in-law attacks him. Original poster threatens to call the police, and they leave. Original poster posts the story first on social media, controlling the narrative among extended family. A week later, the family returns, demanding that the original poster change his mind, but he doesn't. A week after that, Dan and sister-in-law show up with a moving truck and drill out his locks, ready to move in. Original poster shows up, quickly gets back in his truck, and calls the police. Chaos ensues, but original poster finally gets them to leave with police help. Some comments from original post. Somebody said, "In your first post, you mentioned that you wondered how they found out your address. I can answer that for you if you are in America. Property ownership is a matter of public record. All they would need is your name and the county you live in, and they could search for your address. I live in Ohio, and the county auditor's website maintains a searchable database of property ownership records. All you need is the owner's first and last name, and it will give you the addresses of every single property that person owns in the county." Another commenter, "Dan is a real family man? He lives with his parents because he cannot afford to live independently with his wife and the 4 kids they've created. Dan and sister-in-law are complete losers and a burden to society." Original poster, an observation. "They don't think they are horrible. Your value to them is what you'll provide to benefit them. Get Dan and gang a home. Their outrage is your refusal. How dare you not serve our demands? Who do you think you are, thinking about yourself and not Dan? This is not entitlement. This is toxicity. It is beyond toxicity. They truly thought you would have and you didn't." Another commenter, "Honestly, your story is so crazy that I do believe it. A friend of mine had something similar happen, but it was her mom who tried to move herself in. Friend called me for help, and we called 911 when her mom locked herself in my friend's house and refused to open the door. Then mom claimed it was her house, and she was evicting her daughter. Then she claimed she was the one who called 911. Of course, the cops verified who called 911, then asked if anyone could produce proof of the mortgage. My friend just showed her bank statement, and when she offered to provide the number of her mortgage lender, the cops said it wasn't necessary. Her mom locked herself in the house, and they actually had to break a window because she'd pulled all the living room furniture in front of the door. The entire time, she was screaming that her daughter was committing elder abuse. Mom was 50 at this point. When the cops forcibly dragged her out of the house, she was screaming grape, and at one point pretended to faint. When the police called for an ambulance, she shot up off the ground and attempted to run away. That was one of the craziest things I've ever seen, and I couldn't help but laugh my ass off. She made it half a block away before she was tackled and eventually strapped to a gurney. She was booked for felony break and enter, and my friend never heard from her mom again. Original poster replied, "Good Lord, that woman sounds like how my sister-in-law might be in 20 years part 2. Just after Christmas 2022. Original poster has a Christmas party at his new house for his extended family, but doesn't invite his immediate family. It's going well, and he's having a good time when his immediate family shows up. Extended family calls them out for their actions, and original poster tells the sister-in-law she needs to get a job if she wants to be able to afford a house. Their oldest son, 7 years old, started kicking the original poster and yelling. They finally leave. Later on, the The sister-in-law floats the idea of the parents getting a camper and moving in it, giving the sister-in-law's family full run of the parents' house. The parents shot that idea down quickly. Part 3, Winter 2023. Sometime later, in 2023, original poster's parents ask to meet in public. Dan is with them, and they ask original poster to help Dan get an apartment, co-signing and helping to pay for it. Original poster says no, pointing out that they wouldn't help him when he was homeless and have always favored Dan. He asks his family if they think he's rich, and he breaks down his budget so they can see he isn't. They eventually give up and leave. My sister-in-law has been complaining about the parents and the original poster on social media, but the original poster has ignored it. Original poster decides to rent out the other 2 rooms in his house to friends. His family takes it badly, sending his mom to beg him to let Dan and his family rent from him. Original poster points out that Dan broke into his house and he would never rent to him anyway. Original poster finally gets cameras for his house. Dan discovers sister-in-law has been cheating and the youngest child isn't his. When Dan confronted her about the affair, she attacked him, and their eldest got hurt trying to intervene. Police were called and she was arrested. Once she was released, she went to original poster's house to call him out on his Reddit posts, causing all of this mess. She shoves the original poster and threatens him. He says he will call the police and has it on his doorbell cam. Original poster decides to take the video from the previous year and the doorbell cam footage to the police, and also gives the footage to Dan's divorce lawyer. After all of sister-in-law's shenanigans, the parents seem to have come out of the fog and have started attending church. They saw a video post describing the saga so far and came to original poster to give a genuine apology. Part 4, Fall 2023. Original poster gets into the details of Dan's divorce. My sister-in-law actually had her affair partner testify. Dan ended up taking on a lot of the debt to get his name off the birth certificate of the baby, but didn't have to pay alimony since sister-in-law ended up working for her family. She got partial custody of the other children, but she rarely sees them. Dan gets depressed and drunk after the divorce and ends up driving to original poster's house. Original poster berates him for driving drunk, but takes him to commiserate in his camper. It becomes sort of a bonding, healing moment for the brothers. Later on, Dan asks if he can borrow the original poster's camper so his kids can have more room in their parents' house while he tries to pay down the debts he took on in the divorce. Original poster agrees, telling him he will be responsible for any damages. Things have started getting a little better between original poster, Dan, and their parents, but original poster sees the biggest improvement in the kids' behavior. Sister-in-law looks down on Dan for moving into the camper, and original poster suspects she egged his truck on Halloween, but whoever did it was bundled up in sweats. New update. Dan returned to my camper, and ex-sister-in-law got a driving under the influence. But I've also got a copycat that has made my family upset all over again. June 25th, 2024. Then the other day, my brother Dan spotted a video with an unbelievably similar to mine in far too many ways. Only it was about an OP with a twin sister instead of a sister-in-law. But it had so much of the same. Entitled Narcissistic Parents, guy treated like hell all his life, and then rendered homeless, golden child sibling, keeping the favoritism a closely guarded secret from family while the OP was growing up. Sister still in her 20s, has 3 kids and was pregnant with a 4th. Sister's eldest son attacks OP, and above all them trying to steal the OP's house by breaking in while he wasn't home. So many parts were nearly identical. Even 2 lines like "suck it up" and "my house is not up for grabs" were in the video. My parents and brother are frankly pissed, and I wasn't happy seeing the video either. We've all been trying hard to get past our previous family dynamic and what ex-sister-in-law put us all through. You can imagine it took a lot for me to let go of my grudges. But in a year, my parents and Dan have improved more than I'd seen in my entire life before that. And I love me nibblings to pieces. So whoever wrote that copycat story, congratulations, you just sent my entire family right back into needing therapy. And yes, my family is aware I'm making this post. Now with that rant over, here's what I hope to be my final update. Now for what was stated in the title. I had a few naysayers before, but Dan kept his word. My camper was returned to me a few months ago and in good condition. Dan took good care of it and thoroughly cleaned it before giving it back. He and our father also resealed the roof on it once while it was in their care. Inside, it's no worse for wear than it was when I was living in it. Only I got it back smelling like pine cleaner. There was some minor drama while Dan was living in my camper from a neighbor right behind them. Not quite sure she qualifies as a Karen, but she was close enough. She started yelling at them from over the fence about the camper and started threatening the police. My brother and father went off on her and then explained Dan was living in the camper so his son could have his bedroom. Well, the neighbor still wasn't happy, but stopped with the threats. My father talked to her husband later, though, and he was bull mad at her. Then he apologized on her behalf and said Dan was doing a good thing by giving up his room to his son. The neighbor husband also congratulated Dan on kicking out ex-sister-in-law and said he was always afraid to mention it before, but she was just a horrid woman. We can all agree on that now. So yeah, the neighbors aren't a problem anymore. Dan and our father managed to get some money together on the side and bought a slightly bigger camper to set up in our parents' backyard. We needed my truck just to move it. But we got it in there. It's basically the best Dan can do right now till the credit debts his ex piled up are paid off. And even then, he's got the future of his kids to plan for. He may be living in that camper for the next 10 years, but it's preferable to how it was when he was married. His ex-wife certainly can't and won't be contributing to college funds for the kids. Except maybe for her affair baby. Dan's camper is admittedly better than mine, and it's newer, bigger, and has its own bathroom. Mine does not, although Dan never really uses said bathroom. It's basically become a closet since the toilet and shower are so tiny. If he needs to take a leak or something, he just goes in the house. Dan and I had a joking laugh about me being jealous he's got the better hobo house, and we bantered like sarcastic gentlemen about it. He's kitted out his camper with some better amenities, like a flat-screen TV complete with streaming, video games, and DVD. He said it feels like he really has his own place now, even though he's just in the backyard, and he's much happier now that he's divorced. Dan tells me one day he'll get a truck too, just so he can move the camper on his own someday. But for now, he's sticking with his minivan for the sake of his kids. So his camper is sitting pretty where it is, and mine is back in my backyard where it belongs. Though it's not gone unused. I temporarily rented it to a cousin who moved into the area for work, and they were only in the camper for about a month before finding their own apartment. Other than that, it serves as a guest house when needed. Relatives come by to use it when in town so as to not need a motel. My nephew has come over to stay in it a few times for fun as well. His sisters don't really have an interest. The camper is the closest he's ever been to camping. Same here sadly, because I didn't buy that camper to camp, but to live. As for my parents, they've gotten therapy. My mother got medicated for her mental problems and fully acknowledges her terrible past mistakes as a parent with all of the favoritism, as does my father. My father is still awkward around me, but he's been fairly active in his church and is working hard to rebuild the family reputation as best he can. And Dan has cut back on drinking a lot since he isn't so stressed out anymore. He's even taken up exercising. He's in pretty good shape now. And he told me his ex-wife saw the picture of him he posted online after shedding 20 pounds and called him to compliment. He didn't take the bait. As for the holidays, my parents, brother, and nibblings all came to my Christmas Eve party last year, along with most of the other relatives who came the year prior. No problems at all, save for the fact none of them could stay the night in my spare rooms anymore since I rented them out. Both of my tenants were away seeing their own families too. Things went swimmingly. Not only was ex-sister-in-law not invited, she wouldn't have been able to crash the party anyway because of my restraining order against her. But she also barely made any attempt to spend time with her other kids either. She only bothered to see them twice a month at best. She didn't even send them any gifts for Christmas or birthdays since being outed as a cheater. And the kids were initially pretty upset about that. But now, they just don't care. Ex-sister-in-law, I guess, decided she was going to try to live like she was single again, despite having a baby at home. And it didn't go well, because life gave her one hell of a cheese slap. On New Year's, ex-sister-in-law went out late to party like it was 1999. And she got pulled over by a cop on her way home. She got arrested for driving under the influence, and her car was impounded. She called Dan while being arrested, begging him to come get her car to keep it from going impound. He told her he was not helping her, and she could deal with it herself. Dan has drunk and drove, so it was kinda a little hypocritical. But this woman put him through so much, I don't blame him for rebuffing her. Some flying monkey of my ex-sister-in-laws called Dan to berate about him being a terrible person. Pretty sure this was the same woman who called me a while back. Dan had none of her crap, and went off on her with a long tirade about his ex's cheating, what happened in the divorce, and that he has no sympathy for his ex since she left him with mounds of credit card debt and she does nothing for their kids anymore. The flying monkey didn't call back. We still don't know who she was. But Dan said she sounded like a religious nut. Ex-sister-in-law went to court and she pleaded guilty for driving under the influence. Dan found this out because she called him claiming that because of the driving under the influence, she wouldn't be seeing her other kids anytime soon. She told him she was sentenced to take a 6-month driving under the influence class, in which time her license is suspended until completion, and she won't be allowed to drink at all, which is the part she was most upset about. I've heard of these classes before. They make you take regular and at times random urine tests, and when you finally get your license back, you have to have a camera and breathalyzer installed in your car for a year. Also, increased insurance rates for the driving under the influence on record. Ex-sister-in-law has not been having a fun time, but I have no pity for her. I don't drink and drive. Sadly, that's all the info I have on ex-sister-in-law, as she's kept minimal contact with Dan for some time now. And eventually she'll probably stop contacting him altogether unless absolutely necessary. I don't know anything else about my sister-in-law's parents or her affair baby. Even Dan doesn't know. But I do still have a bit of info on someone else. Remember, ex-sister-in-law's affair partner, the bronze-tongued lout? Well, he made his social media public again. And he doesn't seem to acknowledge the existence of ex-sister-in-law or his child at all. Dan tried to message him, and promptly got an immediate block. So the guy is just being an ass and acting like his hell doesn't stink. Whatever. His knocking up ex-sister-in-law got her out of the family anyway. So in a way, we're all thankful to that affair partner bastard. That's everything I have, and hopefully won't need to come back again, unless my truck gets egged again next Halloween. In the comments section, someone asked, I have a question. Did your parents give any reason or answer as to why they favored Dan? Original poster replied, that's kinda a sore topic now for the family. But in going to therapy, it was mainly just the fact Dan was younger. So my mother always saw him as the baby, and the baby needed more. Her mental problems that are now diagnosed and medicated did not help. I won't speak of her medical stuff because she's asked me not to, and I respect that. But her acting crazy back then made my father do so as well, and before they knew it, they'd fallen so deep into it that their lives centered around Dan and narcissism. So it became easy to make me the metaphorical punching bag to keep the family peace. My father is the kind of person who hates apologizing. So if he did something wrong, he'd try to stand by it and act like anyone who argued with him about it was wrong. That's why we were moved hours away from the rest of the family. My father has changed significantly in the past year. He and I are still awkward around each other, and he's referred to himself as a terrible human being many times. Not only has he worked hard to improve the family as a whole, he's also been volunteering for garbage cleanup through the church. And he's made a couple new friends as well. I'm not sure we'll ever have a decent father and son bond. But it's good enough for me that he acknowledges where he went wrong. My mother is habitually apologetic now, but is overall kind and not showing the behavior she used to. Also, the main focus these days is on my nibblings, and she's not shown favoritism to any of them, nor has Dan or my father. I admit I do relate to my nephew a little more, and he spent the night in my camper a few times. But my two nieces don't care for that, and don't like my house as much since I have tenants. But at my parents' house, I do my best to play with all the nibblings. I even did the tea party thing with my nieces, though we used actual tea, and boy do they like it packed with cane sugar. I'm more of a sweet and low guy myself. A commenter replied, I have one suggestion for you for your relationship with your parents. Never forgive and never forget. These kinds of parents are like addicts for validation and forgiveness. If you give them even a slight indication that you are past all of your trauma, they will stop improving and go back to being like their old selves. I learned it the hard way from my own mother. To be blunt, based on all of your posts, I think your parents are still not 100% honest in their apologies. Your mother is intentionally overcorrecting and your father undercorrection, a common strategy similar to good cop and bad cop. And people don't do 180 unless they had something traumatic happen to them. In your case, your parents inflicted trauma on you but didn't receive trauma. Intentionally doing 180 is nearly impossible to achieve since that is akin to brainwashing oneself. And never let your parents forget what they did. There are some instances where bringing up the past is useful. It keeps people in line. It also keeps them at a distance so that you are no longer vulnerable to them. All of this may seem very negative at first, but it creates boundaries that are essential in any relationship, boundaries that your parents cruelly crossed before. Original poster also replied, Oh, I've long since made it clear I won't forget. Not sure if I've forgiven, but holding the grudge didn't do me any good either. And I made it clear I likely would not be associating with them if it weren't for my